All right, chapter 240, A New Epic. 20 months had elapsed since the events just related. 20 months has been over a year. It is now the end of January 1843. Okay, 1843 is the year that Richard is supposed to reunite with his brother. Like, we're getting very close to the end of this story, but I wondered how they were going to fit like almost 2 years in to just the remaining chapters. This is how they're going to skip a year and a half. Okay, January 1843. On the left-hand side of Bridges Street, as you proceed from the Strand toward Russell Street, Covent Garden, you may perceive a lamp projecting over the door of an establishment which, viewed externally, appears to be a modest eating-house, but which in reality is one of the most remarkable places of nocturnal entertainment in London. Upon the lamp alluded to are painted these words, "The Paradise." It was past midnight towards the end of January 1843 when two gentlemen, wearing fashionable Taglioni coats over their elegant attire, and impregnating the fine frosty air with the vapors of their cigars, strolled into this establishment. Proceeding down a passage, they pushed open a door with a painted ground-glass window and entered a spacious supper-room. This apartment was lofty, handsomely fitted up, well-furnished, and provided with boxes containing little tables, like the coffee-room of a hotel. A cheerful fire burnt in the grate, and the numerous lights suspended around the apartment were reflected in a handsome mirror over the mantelpiece. Above the door leading into the room was a species of gallery, forming a grotto-like opening into a suite of upper apartments, which were reached by a flight of stairs leading from the passage just now mentioned. All was gaiety and bustle, both in the coffee-room below and the chambers above. Numerous suppers were in progress, the partakers thereof consisting of gentlemen of various descriptions and ladies of only one particular class. Oysters, lobsters, cold fowls, ham, and kidneys constituted the principal edibles, while liquor flowed copiously and in all gradations of luxury, from humble porter and pewter pots to sparkling champagne in green bottles. The meal portion of the guests was composed of those various specimens of gentlemen who either turn night into day or who make up for the toils of the day by dissipating enjoyments of the night. There was an attorney's clerk who, having picked up a stray guinea in a manner for which he would not perhaps have liked to account, was doing the liberal in the shape of oysters, stout, and hot brandy and water to some fair woman whom he had never before seen and whom he would perhaps never see again, but with whom he was on the very best possible terms for the time being. The only trifling damper to his enjoyment was her constant anxiety lest her friend should happen to come in and catch her at supper with the said attorney's clerk. There was a notorious blackleg who was regaling a couple of frail ones with champagne and looking out for flats as well, while his accomplice was doing precisely the same in the next box, both these respected gentlemen affecting to be total strangers to each other. There was also a handsome young man who, having just come of age, stepped into the possession of a good property, was commencing his career of waste and extravagance at the Paradise. Proud of the nauseating flattery of the 3 or 4 abandoned women who had him in tow, he was literally throwing his money in all directions and staring around him with the vacant air of semi-intoxication, as much as to say, "Don't you think me a very fine, dashing fellow indeed?" In another box was an old man, who had reached the wrong side of 60, but who was endeavoring to make a young girl of 17 believe that he was but 44 last birthday, a tale which she had too much tact to appear to doubt for a moment, as the antiquated beau supplied her with copious draughts of champagne to enable her to swallow the lie more easily. A little further on was a dandified, stiff-necked, coxcomical individual of about 26, sipping sherry with a friend and endeavoring to render himself as polite and agreeable as possible, but at every word he spoke he drew out the edge of the tablecloth to precisely the extent of a yard between his forefingers and thumbs, whereby it was easy to perceive that, although he assured his companion he was a captain in the guards, he in reality exercised the less conspicuous but more active employment of a linen draper's assistant. Crowding near the fire were several Cyprians, who had not as yet obtained cavaliers, and were therefore hovering between the alternatives of supper or no supper, the odds being at all appearance in favor of the latter. They did not, however, seem very unhappy while their fate as to oysters and stout was pending in the balance of suspense, but laughed, chattered, and larked amongst themselves, and then, by way of avoiding anything like monotony or sameness in their recreation, 2 of them got up a pleasant little quarrel which terminated in a brisk exchange of blows and scratches. Leaning over the side of the grotto-like gallery before referred to were two individuals, whose appearance was something between that of dissipated actors and broken-down tradesmen, and who were so disguised in liquor that their own mothers could scarcely have recognized them. Being most probably wearied of their own conversation, they diverted themselves by addressing their remarks to the people in the coffee room below, whom they invited in the most condescending manner possible to flare up, mind their eyes, form a union, and enact various other little social civilities of the same ambiguous nature. Within the upper rooms were several ladies and jovially disposed gentlemen, all mainly intent upon the pleasures of eating or drinking, which occupations were, however, relieved by boisterous shouts of laughter and practical jokes of all kinds. In justice to the proprietor of this establishment, it must be observed that he conducted it upon as orderly a system as could be possibly maintained, when the characters of his patrons and patronesses are taken into consideration, and the moment a disturbance occurred, either himself or his waiters adopted the most efficient means of putting an end to it, by bundling the offender's neck and crop into the street. The two gentlemen who lounged, as before stated, into this celebrated night house on the occasion alluded to, took possession of a vacant box, and throwing down their cigars, summoned the waiter. "Yes, sir, coming, sir, directly, sir," cried the chief functionary, thus adjured, and who was busy at the moment in disputing the items of the score with a linen-draper's assistant. But when that little matter was duly settled to the satisfaction of the waiter and the discomfiture of the assistant aforesaid, he hurried up to the table occupied by the newcomers. "Well, what shall we have, Harborough?" asked one of the gentlemen, appealing to his companion. We haven't seen Harborough and Chichester for a while. I wondered if they'd come back." "'Pon my honor, I don't care a rap," was the reply. "Order what you like, old fellow." Thus encouraged, Mr. Chichester, for it was he, desired the waiter to bring no end of oysters and to follow with a cold fowl. "Yes, sir, certainly, sir," said the domestic, hastily transferring a pepper-box from one side of the table to the other and smoothing down the cloth. "Please to order anything to drink, gentlemen?" "A bottle of champagne," returned Mr. Chichester, "and make haste about it." "Yes, sir, this minute, sir," and the waiter glided away with that kind of shuffling, shambling motion which no living being, save waiters, can ever accomplish. I've been a server in a restaurant, so that makes me laugh. When the provender was duly supplied and the first glass of champagne was quaffed, Chichester leaned across the table and said to the baronet in a low tone of chuckling triumph, "Well, old chap, I don't think we can complain of fortune during the last 3 or 4 months." "No, far from it," returned Sir Rupert Harborough, "but we mustn't be idle because we happen to have a few £5 notes in our pocket. However, things will turn up, I dare say." "Yes, if we look out for them," said Chichester, "but not unless. By the by, who do you think I met this afternoon as I was strolling along the Strand?" "Can't say at all," replied the baronet. "Who?" "Greenwood," added Chichester. "The deuce you did! And how is he looking?" "Not so slap up as he used to be. No jewelry, toggery not quite new, hat showing marks of the late rain, boots patched at the sides, and cotton gloves." "The scoundrel! Do you remember how he served me about that bill which I accepted in Lord Tremorden's name? Shouldn't I like to pay him out for it," said the baronet. "But how he has fallen within the last 2 years! Turned out of his seat for Rottenborough at the last election, obliged to give up his splendid house in Spring Gardens. I'd wondered how Greenwood was doing." "Interesting. And we're all convinced that he's Richard's brother Eugene, so he only has a few more months before he meets up with Richard again. He probably is worried that if he doesn't show up rich, Richard is going to be like, I'm ashamed of you, you're a loser. Doesn't realize Richard just misses him desperately." "All right. Well, we know all about that," interrupted Chichester impatiently. "Don't speak so loud, but look into the next box, the one behind me, I mean, and tell me if you think that young fellow who is treating those girls to champagne would prove a flat or not." The baronet glanced in the direction indicated, and immediately afterwards gave an affirmative nod of the head to his companion. Then, leaning across the table, he whispered, "To be sure he would. I know who he is. It's young Egerton, the son of the great outfitter who died a few years ago, leaving a large fortune in trust for this lad. I'll be bound to say he has just come of age and is launching out. Makes sense they'd go after him. They targeted Richard when he was in the exact same situation." "Does he know you?" inquired Chichester, also speaking in a subdued tone. "I am almost certain he does," replied the baronet, "but sit up. We will soon see what he is made of. I will touch him on the cross that we have got up together." The two friends resumed the discussion of their supper, and in a few minutes began to converse with each other in a tone loud enough to be heard, and intended also to be heard in the next box. "And so you really think that the Haggerstone Pet will beat the Birmingham Bruiser, Mr. Chichester?" observed the baronet in a tone of mere friendly courtesy. I am convinced of it, Sir Rupert, in spite of the odds, was the answer, delivered in the same punctilious manner. Will you take my 4 ponies upon the Haggerstone Pet to 5? Done, Mr. Chichester, cried the baronet. Then drawing out a betting book from the breast pocket of his coat, he proceeded to enter the wager, saying aloud and in a measured tone as he did so, back Birmingham Bruiser against Haggerstone Pet, 5 ponies to 4, Honourable Arthur Chichester. There it is. This ceremony was followed on the part of Mr. Chichester, who, having produced his book, wrote down the wager, saying, back Haggerstone Pet against Birmingham Bruiser, 4 ponies to 5, Sir Rupert Harborough, Baronet. And now, exclaimed the baronet, before we put up our books, I'll give you another chance. Will you take 300 to 1 that the favourites for the fight and the Derby both win? Or don't both win? Stop, Sir Rupert, cried Chichester. Let me first see how I stand for the Derby. Then, as if speaking to himself, he continued, take an even 500, 4 horses against the field from Lord Dunstable, 700 to 1 against Eagle Wing from the Honourable Colonel Cholmondeley, bet it even 500, skyscraper to Moonraker with the Honourable Augustus Smicksmack. Well, Sir Rupert, he exclaimed, raising his head from the contemplation of the leaf on which these sham bets were entered, I don't mind if I take you. It's a bargain, said the baronet, and the wager was accordingly inscribed in the little books. The 2 gentlemen then refreshed themselves, each with another draught of champagne, and Sir Rupert Harborough, as he drank, glanced over the edge of his glass into the next box to ascertain the effect produced upon Mr. Egerton by the previous little display of sporting spirit. That effect was precisely the one which had been anticipated. Mr. Egerton was not so tipsy that he was struck with the aristocratic names of the 2 gentlemen in the next box, and he raised his head to take a view of Sir Rupert Harborough, Baronet, and the Honourable Arthur Chichester. So satisfactory was the result of the survey, at least to himself, that he determined not only to show off a little of his own dashing spirit, but also, if possible, to form the acquaintance of the 2 gentlemen. For like many young fellows similarly circumstanced, he was foolish enough to believe that the possession of money must prove a passport to the best society, if he could only obtain an opening. Therefore, having greedily devoured every word of the dialogue just detailed, and taking it for granted that nothing in this world was ever more sincere than the betting of Sir Rupert Harborough, Baronet, and the Honourable Arthur Chichester, Mr. Egerton exclaimed, Beg pardon, gentlemen, for intruding upon you, but I think I heard you staking some heavy sums on the coming fight. Really, sir, said the baronet gravely, I was not aware that anything which took place between me and this gentleman could be overheard, and yet, after all, he added with a gracious smile, I do not know that there is the least harm in a little quiet bet. Harm, no, said Mr. Egerton. All I can say is that I admire sporting men. I honour them. They're an ornament to the country. What would old England be with her turf, her hunting, her prize fighting? It told me to hiccup, so I did. Pretty good acting right there, right? You're impressed? Without her turf, her hunting, her prize fighting. For my part, I have a great idea of this fight, a very great idea. But I back the Birmingham Bruiser, I do. I'm just glancing ahead. I'm going to keep hiccuping during his dialogue. All right, I got to hone those skills for my school. So do I, sir, answered the baronet. My friend here, however, the Honourable Mr. Chichester, fancies the Haggerstone Pet. I heard him say so, returned the young man, but if he hasn't made up his book, I don't mind betting him £500 to his 4. That's the odds, I believe. Yes, those are the odds, observed Mr. Chichester carelessly. Then taking out his book, he said, but I am already so deep in this fight that I really am afraid. However, if you wish it, I don't mind. Is it a bet then, sir? Asked the young gentleman, looking round the room with an air of importance, as if he were quite accustomed to the thing, although it was in reality the first wager he had ever laid in his life. It shall be so if you choose, sir, returned Chichester. Then, glancing in an inquiring manner towards his new acquaintance, he said with a bland smile, I really beg your pardon, but I do not have the pleasure— Oh, truly, you do not know me from Adam, interrupted the other, but you shall know me, sir, and I hope we shall know each other better, too. He then produced his card, and Mr. Chichester, of course, affected not to have been previously aware of the young gentleman's name. The bet between them was duly recorded by Mr. Chichester in his little book, and Mr. Albert Egerton on the back of a love letter. The latter gentleman then called for his bill, and having glanced at the amount, paid it without a murmur, adding a munificent donation for the waiter. Having effected this arrangement, by means of which he got rid of the women who had fastened themselves on him, he coolly passed round to the table at which his new acquaintances were seated, and called for another bottle of champagne. When it was brought, he was about to pay for it, but Sir Rupert interrupted him, saying, No, that would be too bad. If you sit at our table, you are our guest, and here's to a better acquaintance. The bottle went round rapidly, and Mr. Egerton became quite enchanted with the agreeable manners of Sir Rupert Harborough, Baronet, and the offhand pleasant conversation of the Honourable Arthur Chichester. No, it's like watching Richard getting taken in all over again. Someone has to save Mr. Egerton from himself. It was now past 1 o'clock, and the baronet proposed to depart. "Which way do you go?" inquired Egerton. "Oh, westward, of course," returned Harborough in a tone of gentle remonstrance, as much as to say that there could have been no doubt upon the subject. "Will you walk with us?" "Certainly," was the answer, "and we will smoke a cigar as we go." The baronet called for the bill, paid it, and led the way from the room, followed by Egerton and Chichester, the former of whom insisted upon stopping at the bar to take some soda water, as he declared himself half seized over. While the three gentlemen were engaged in partaking of a bottle of the refreshing beverage, Sir Rupert felt his coat sleeve gently pulled from behind, and turned around, he perceived a man whom he had noticed in the coffee-room. Indeed, this was one of the blacklegs already alluded to as having been engaged in treating Cyprians to supper and champagne. The baronet instantly comprehended the nature of the business which this individual had to address him upon, and, making him a significant sign, he said to Chichester, "Do you and Mr. Egerton go very slowly along the Strand, and I will follow you in a few minutes. I have a word to say to this gentleman." Gentleman, indeed. One of the most astounding knaves in London, but vice and roguery compel the haughty aristocrat to address the lowest ruffian as an equal. Chichester took Egerton's arm and sauntered out of the house, attended to the door by the obsequious master of the establishment, an honour shown only to those who drink champagne or claret. "Well, sir, what is it?" asked the baronet, taking the man aside and speaking to him in a whisper. "Only this, Sir Rupert," returned the man. "You've got that youngster in tow, and he'll turn out profitable, no doubt. Me and my pal, which is inside the room there, meant to have had him somehow or another, and we planted our women on him tonight, but we thought he wasn't drunk enough, and then you came in and take him from us. Your friend has nailed him for a bet of 500, which he's safe to pay, so you must stand something for my disappointment." "I understand you, sir," said the baronet. "Here are 20 pounds, and if the bet be paid, you shall have 30 more. Will that do?" "Thank you for the 20, which is ready," answered the blackleg, consigning the notes to his pocket. "Now, never mind the other 30, but make the best you can out of that young chap, and all I ask in return is just a word or two about the mill that's coming off." "I don't understand you," said the baronet, colouring. Come, that won't do," continued the man. "But don't be afeard, it's all in the way of business that I'm speaking. I see you and Mr. Chichester at a public about 3 weeks ago, along with the Birmingham Bruiser, and therefore I knowed you as the friend which deposited the money for him, but which kept him in the background. So all I want is the office, just a single word. Is the Bruiser to win, or to make a cross of it?" "So they're in cahoots with one of the pugilists, one of the fighters, and they decide whether or not he's going to throw a match so that they can make money off their bets." "Oh, really, my good fellow," stammered the baronet. "Only just one word, so that I may know how to lay my money," persisted the blackleg, "and your secret is safe with me. For my own interest it will be so, if you tell me which way it is to be." "Can I rely on you?" said Sir Rupert. "But of course I may, if you really mean to bet. Now keep the thing dark, and you may win plenty of money. The Bruiser is to lose. The odds are 5-4 on him now, and they will be 7-4 in favor before the night comes off. No one suspects that it is to be a cross, and the reports of the Bruiser's training are glorious." "Enough, and as mum as a dead man, Sir Rupert," whispered the blackleg. He then returned to the supper-room, and the baronet hastened after his friends. Okay, there we go. So we've caught back up with Sir Rupert and with Mr. Chichester, and they're still scoundrels. They're now trying to take someone else for money. They're throwing fights. I'm wondering if we're ever going to catch back up with the Earl of Warrington and Mrs. Arlington. We haven't seen them in a while. I'm wondering what's happened to Richard in the last 20 months. We know that Mr. Greenwood lost his place in Parliament and lost his fancy house and isn't doing as well for himself. So we'll see where that ends up going. We're getting closer and closer to the end. We'll see.